Welcome to BAM Fight Club, UFC Fight Night preview between Blaydes and Dawkis. First up on the main card, we have Mark Dawkis versus Vyacheslav Borchev. that was a horrible butchering of the name, but yeah, Fern, what are your thoughts on this first fight?
I was surprised Mark Dawkis, fighting out of Manchester, that he wasn't on the card last weekend. So I hope that he's able to get himself on one of the future cards going forward. Definitely want to see what, all that entails. So with that being said, Mark Dawkis, stand-up fighter, huge reach, 73-inch reach, trains with American top team. His last fight, he lost by guillotine. It was a funny fight because within 5 seconds, he got hit in the groin. And it's just I think the world's fastest groin strike I've ever seen. So, got a beautiful lunging jab, high right hand for his defense. Right step kick is beautiful. He ended up getting taken down and getting his back taken. Alves had great groundwork. So, and then his last fight before that, I'm trying to look at not just their last fight, but let me see their last victory, because his last fight was a loss. So I looked at his last victory. That was a KO victory against Packlin. He controlled the center right away, step kicks, switch kicks, oblique kicks. He did every kind of kick you could do, even a spinning back kick. And he does this interesting thing that I see Kai Kara France does as well, is he has a left hand to kind of set the distance, and then he came in with an overhand right. So that was super cool to see. I'm seeing more and more of these fighters on this fight card, especially who have that style. They just kind of guide themselves and then come in with the overhand. With Borchev, he's Team Alpha Male, which is interesting because Team Alpha Male, is out of the Bay Area, Uriah Faber, all them. Borchev is known as a kickboxer. His last fight against Bush, he had an oblique kick. He's not very quick. For a kickboxer, you would expect him to kind of go forward, have more of Anderson Silva, Israel Adesanya.
Yeah.
They all have kind of a quick pace, and Borchev, for being a kickboxer, doesn't. So he got taken down, and you can tell he's been working on his ground game with Team Alpha Male. Used the butterfly guard, pushes him off him right away, able to stand up, able to get some offense going. He got rocked. He was dazed, but super composed, just was able to kind of pick a shot. He got hit 3 or 4 times and would just fire back one solid one. And then ended up winning that fight by a body shot once he got him pinned against the cage. He's a fighter whose punches make a sound every time they land. So very excited about that one. He's from Dana White Contender Series. He fought this guy by the name of Duncan, knocked him out, left head kick, left jab, high guard, great combos, uppercuts. He actually did the rolling thunder, which is that rolling, spinning heel kick or axe kick, and then, step back and finished it with the left hook. Great striking, aggressive. I think in this one, I don't know what your thoughts are. I see Borchev being the better fighter. He just is more composed and, has that wrestling foundation now.
Yeah, so I think Borchev has a lot fewer fights, so his opponent has a lot more experience for sure, especially in the UFC. So Borchev is coming off of the win in Dana White Contender Series, and then he's at his debut UFC where he got a first round KO, and he's got a 6-1 record. Interesting thing is, if you look at Dawkis, look at his record. Yeah, if you go back to 2017, his record is all wins, with his first 3 wins happening in the UFC, or first three fights in the UFC end up being wins. And he also had a first round KO and a second round KO. So if you look at where Dawkis was at the same point in his career as Borchev, they actually look very similar. It's just that obviously continuing to fight in the UFC, he's fighting higher and higher level guys. And so he has racked up some losses. He's now got 5 losses on his record, and he's coming off of a 2-loss streak here. So that being said, I feel like we just haven't seen enough of Borchev in the UFC to know how good his style really is against the top level competition. Odds makers have it pretty close. They are giving Borchev a little bit of an edge at -160 favorite versus a +135 underdog for Dawkis. So I feel like this is going to be close. This is going to be a good test for Borchev. I don't feel super strongly either way. I feel like it could probably go either way. I don't feel like it's super tilted one way or the other. When you look at these guys' stats, they're either KO or decision fighters. Borchev having slightly less average fight time, having fewer fights in those, fights where he's fighting lesser competition. He's obviously getting them out of there quicker. So I'm not sure I want to make a prediction on this one. I mean, if anything, I'm just going to go with Borchev just because he's coming off of a win streak, where Takizi, all other things being equal, coming off a losing streak, I've got to give the edge to Borchev.
Borchev does a great celebration at the end of his victories. I don't know if you've seen it. He does the Russian, like the cross their arms, gets down like almost like he's squatting and kicks his legs up, like
Oh, is this the guy? Okay, yes, I remember seeing that. Yes, I love that. I love that dance. Yes, it's like one of the things I love about watching Shevchenko's fights is at the end of every one of her fights, she does that little dance that she didn't used to do, I think, earlier in her career. But I feel like it's an important thing. It's like a signature move. It's like after you're done, and it's a much better choice than like the Johnny Walker celebration or Chandler doing a backflip, where whenever they do it, I just cringe. I'm like, oh god, please don't blow out a shoulder or like blow your knee out or something stupid on your celebration. So yeah, do the dance, which is fairly safe and not prone to injury. I do remember seeing that before. That's funny. Who was your pick? Borchev. Okay. So next up we have Hillier Latifi versus Alexsky Olynyk. What are your thoughts on this one?
This is going to be a fight where I think the wrestling is going to play a big factor. Hillier Latifi was a Swedish national wrestling champion. Ton of experience. Not very tall. He's 5'10", which for heavyweight, you see these guys who are like 6'3", 6'4". Alexsky Olynyk, same thing, kind of has that grappling Greco-Roman base. I think this is going to be a fight where they both utilize their grappling to take advantage of certain positions on the ground. Latifi has great top control on the ground. Like when he takes somebody down, you can tell he knows how to balance his weight. Chest heavy, centered everything on it. Olynyk, you see him just he uses a takedown to progress. Like he's transitioning from one position to the next. Whereas Latifi like hold and dominate. Olynyk is like, let me crawl all over you and get going. An interesting point we talked about last week, Patty the Batty had the worst haircut. My vote is now for Alexsky Olynyk. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's pretty bad. Like the back is like a V. Like the front is balding and the back is just like a V. Like just, I don't know what to call it. Like almost like some sort of animal tail. Just terrible. But I appreciate the effort. So Latifi's last fight had a lot of great forward pressure. Caught a kick, dumped him right away, looked to pass the guard, and then pass the side control, and that's where he utilized that top control, the chest heavy. You can see that wrestling base that he utilized so well. He does a good job of blocking and responding. So he'll either block, counter, block, shoot, block, retreat. It's all based off of the block. So it's good to see him just always know his foundation. Protect yourself and then attack. Protect yourself, move. Protect yourself and go from there. He faced some great adversity the last fight. He got an eye poke that you don't see it, like it took a while to see it, but in throwing a right punch, his opponent like grazed his left eye, like kind of had it bleeding. He turns his back, goes like essentially cowers in the corner and just starts getting beat up on, and he just starts like grabbing and trying to regain himself. And had to fight through that. It was wasn't a clear eye poke because it was like a thumb versus like when you see somebody putting their hand out like a John Jones eye poke, we'll say. This was a more subtle
signature the signature John Jones.
But everyone's gonna know what we're talking about, like, oh yeah, John Jones eye poke. And so he utilized his defense and his wrestling to get himself out of that situation and win by decision. With Olynyk, does typical like just basic boxing, keeps his right hand up on his chin and then kind of goes from there. Jabs to the head and body. He has really great jabs to the body, straight jab to the body, which you don't see at heavyweight. I think at heavyweight, it might be more beneficial, like boxing wise, to try to tire them out, get them to gas out, hit them while they're breathing out and make them lose their breath. His overhand right is pretty solid, so he sets up with, jab to body, jab to head, overhand right. Inside left kicks were solid. You can just see that, those aren't his comfortable, like that's not his comfort zone. He just uses it to set up a takedown and go from there. Use the upper body clinch to then go to single leg, like again utilizing that Greco-Roman background that like he kind of seems to come from. Is just everything off of the clinch is pretty amazing. And then he had this great transition where he did a takedown, and as he goes to takedown, the guy turns his back, ends up taking the back, and then he ends up getting him to the mount, in the mount position. I thought his last fight was a close fight. I don't think it could have gone either way, but it's exciting because it sets up this match where you have two people with strong wrestling foundation and decent striking going at it, and they both stand in front of each other. They don't back up, they both stand in front and go from there. What are your thoughts on this?
So I feel like with Alexsky, his stand-up, the thing I notice about him a lot is he does what a lot of wrestlers do, I feel like, which is really kind of put that head down, like, bull charging. Maybe that's why he ends up throwing that overhand right so much, is because he's, kind of faking the shot, and that opens up the overhand right. It's pretty common with a lot of wrestlers. I think the thing that stands out the most probably about this fight is that Alexsky's record of 59-16. This guy's an absolute veteran. He's got a lot of miles on the engine here. It is interesting. They both started around the same time in the UFC though, but Alexsky has a lot more fights than Latifi. So Alexsky's 44. He's coming off of a 3-fight losing streak, which normally doesn't bode well. But also Latifi, even though he got a win in his last fight, before that he was on a 3-fight losing streak. They both lost to Derek Lewis. They've both lost to some of the same guys. So I feel like this is another one where you've got a mirror image. The two guys are the same, and it could go either way. Now the odds makers are given a negative 200 favorite to Latifi, which is interesting. He is a little bit bigger in weight, shorter, not, like I said, not as many miles on the engine for sure, but Alexsky's got a 7-inch reach advantage too. If I had to choose one, I'm actually going to go with Alexsky, just because of the experience. I mean, they're both pretty experienced fighters, but Alexsky's very crafty, and you can't count, as we've seen like with Arlovsky, where even if their physical attributes aren't what they once were, they just know so much about the game that they have different ways of winning that guys that don't have as much experience are not going to be able to see those opportunities. So I'm going to pick the underdog in this one. I think he's worth putting some money on potentially.
Yeah, I would actually agree with you on that one. His losses, even though he's lost recently, his losses come to, Sergey Spivak, who's a really tall, lanky striker. Chris Dawkis, who is, main event, on this fight card. Derek Lewis, all guys who have solid punching, solid power. Hillier Latifi doesn't have that. And unless, somehow Latifi's able to hurt him and get him, on the back foot, I don't see it, being much of an issue. I definitely agree with, this is a great, better's choice for this fight.
Next up, we have Askar Askarov versus Kai Kara-France. Man, I cannot wait to see this one after Kai Kara-France's last fight against Cody Garbrandt, that absolutely brutal knockout. I feel like it's going to be super exciting. Although he's a big underdog, almost a 3-1 underdog going against Askar Askarov, who's coming in as a negative 360 favorite. Yeah, how do you break down this one?
Askarov, looking at his last fight was interesting because he came overweight. These guys are kind of, Kara-France, I believe, is 5'4". Askarov is around that height or slightly taller. Askarov had a great fight against Joseph Benavidez. Anyone who knows Benavidez, was Team Alpha Male. Been around trained with Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt, Uriah Faber. In this fight, Benavidez was significantly shorter. Had great front kicks, great right hand counter. Again, he's doing that keep your left hand out, right hand over jab, and took his back right away, and he controlled Joe Benavidez for all of round 2, which was amazing. Kara-France, I could watch all his fights over and over and over. He's a city kickboxing guy. His last fight against Cody Garbrandt was amazing. Cody Garbrandt was coming down from another weight class. It did 7 months to do the weight cut. He looked significantly smaller. Cody Garbrandt is around my height, 5'8", yet cut down to 125. I'm 195, almost 200, and I'm no way, how? And so you see Kara-France, he looks like a little boy. He looks like, my son's 11 years old, and he looks like my son. I was oh my goodness, what did he get himself into? But his confidence, he did not let the size, the experience, all that. Cody Garbrandt being a former UFC champion didn't affect him at all. He took control right away, lunging punches, kicks, left hand guiding his overhands. He ends up finishing the fight with like a 6 or 7 punch combo, which was beautiful to watch. Just at the end of it, just essentially like grabbing him by the throat and then just, forcing him into the punches. Another fight that he did was against Bontorin, where he was like controlled for most of the fight, grappling wise. Rogelio Bontorin, great grappling pedigree, Muay Thai, amateur kickboxing, made him have to circle, have to avoid. He was essentially in a rear naked choke defense for like the majority of the round and majority of the fight. Ended up standing up and turning, able to shake him off, getting him to turn, pawing jabs. Like he had like 20 seconds left in the round and was able to put his work together beautifully and stop him. It was a crazy stoppage. Do you remember watching it where like Bontorin slumps and falls on his head? Kara France runs off. Herb Dean never waved it off, so Kara France comes back to hit him. Yeah. Herb Dean then stops it. Bontorin gets his mouth guard, throws it at him, and just like it was funny to watch. This is a fight I'm excited to see. I don't know if I agree with the odds. Like I think it's a lot closer for sure. I'd love for Kara France to win because I think with a win like here, he sets himself up for title contention.
This is definitely an underdog pick for me at plus 280. When you look at Kai Kara France, his last 2 fights, first round knockouts, I feel like there was a change in him after his loss against Royval. Kara France has always been, a great fighter and is always looking for that knockout. But if you look at since he started in the UFC, it was nothing but decision wins, which is similar to Askarov. Askarov has 3 decision wins and a draw in the UFC, which is just how Kara France started off his career. But it seems like there was a change, and I believe he did I'm trying to recall, did Kara France change gyms or striking coaches? I remember him talking about something changed either in the Cody Garbrandt fight or the fight before that. And anyway, if he didn't change anything, it looks like a different guy to me in terms of how hungry he is and the way in which he won his last 2 fights. So to have 2 first round knockouts like that for a guy who has experience in the UFC, and then to give him a plus 280 against a guy who has a draw and 3 wins in the UFC, I don't really understand, I guess, where that's coming from. I don't know if it's the reach advantage, the height, or what, but Kara France is a striker, and Askarov, he's also a striker. He doesn't have any submission wins. He does have submission wins. I don't know how they get to that. I guess it's because it's the wrestler versus striker mentality, where the wrestler is going to have the advantage, because if you can get on top, you're essentially winning the fight. So maybe the odds makers are predicting a boring fight that Askarov is going to be able to take down Kara France and just hold top position. But I don't really see that happening. Kara France has gone against some really good wrestlers, and that's not how those other fights have gone down, from what I recall.
I don't agree with the discrepancy in the odds. Just his training camp alone, he's training against, with Israel Adesanya, Dan Hooker, who just fought last weekend. He's around guys who are staying active, busy, and I expect to see some of that with his activity level this fight.
Next up, we have Matt Brown versus Bryan Barbarena. And talk about close fights. The odds makers say this one is dead even at -110 on each side. Matt Brown, let's see here, is coming off of a KO win against Lima in his last fight. Brown is an absolute veteran. He's a guy who's a very well-rounded MMA guy. Great striking, great on the ground. He can get up and not be held down and controlled. And I feel like it's the same thing with Barbarena. Barbarena's last fight was a decision win over Darian Weeks. It was a really close fight. Barbarena is also a veteran, although between the two, the biggest difference I see, I feel like Barbarena favors striking a bit more than Brown does, even though they're both considered strikers if you look at their fighting styles on the ESPN. But I feel like this is another mirror match where the UFC just found like 2 guys who have the same record, same style, and they're just like put them together and see what happens. They both have a similar reach, 2.5 reach advantage for Brown. They both have similar records. Brown's got 25-18, Barbarena's 16-8. They're both coming off of wins. They both have similar KO finishes. Brown has maybe a few more subs. Barbarena has a few more decision wins. Similar fight times. Like, This is another mirror match, I feel like. And yeah, kind of as the odds makers are indicating here, this is a 50-50. I wouldn't put money on either guy because I don't know who would you really favor in this one.
I'm always gonna root for the old guy because Matt Brown has been fighting on UFC since 2008. Undercards for people like Couture versus Lesnar, like Jackson versus Jardine, Couture versus Vera, St. Pierre. Like, he's just been around so long. And it was great to see his last fight where he knocked out Diego Lima. And he was like, how's that for 41 or whatever his birthday was, you B-words. And I was like, yeah. That was like the first thing he said to the camera. And I'm like, yeah, I want to have that attitude because, he's getting up there in age. You can see he's almost all gray hair, still fighting, still putting on shows for everyone. He is what I would think he's to me a version of like a Cowboy Cerrone, just a guy that you want to see fight, who is, can hang with the top guys, and you want to see them keep winning and keep showing that they can do this. I would say for me, just Matt Brown. Barbarena, I haven't watched too much of him. Brown, I've always been a fan of his just because his attitude and, he just goes for it. I gotta love that. And then just that attitude of just be like, how's that for 40? I'm like, oh, I'll have my moment one day.
Yeah. All right, and yeah, that should be a fun one. These are guys who are both willing to just stand and throw and go to war. So should be an exciting fight. Next up, we got Joanne Wood versus Alexsky Grasso. So I think this was a few days ago the headliner, and then Curtis Blaydes and Dawkis, I feel like just in the past day or so, just slid their way into mainlining this one. So I'm not sure what was going on there, but I love watching Joanne Wood, who formerly was Joanne Calderwood, I believe, was her maiden name. And it's funny that it's now just shortened, it seems like. Yeah, it's just easier to say. It's interesting with this one because Joanne's coming off of a 2-fight losing streak, whereas Grasso's coming off of a 2-fight winning streak. When it comes to MMA, the mental game, the confidence plays such a big factor. I'm always going to give it to the person who has momentum in terms of an edge. Although in this one, I want to see Wood win because I love watching her fight. She's one of the few fighters from Scotland that's in the top ranks of the UFC. Actually, I'm not sure if she's where she's ranked right now, Joanne Wood, but has been ranked, fought some of the best people, has wins over Jessica Ai, Andrea Lee, Ariana Lipsky, has racked up some really good wins. She's a veteran. She's been in the UFC since 2014 when she was in the Ultimate Fighter 20. And Grasso, not quite as much experience, but still a great fighter. She's from Mexico. Like I said, coming off of 2 wins with her last win against Macy Barber. So it's not, definitely not a pushover. To get a win over Macy Barber, I feel like is a big feather in her cap and has got to really boost that confidence. What are your thoughts on this matchup here?
I would like to see Wood keep up a record, try to keep going up and keep ascending the ranks. Grasso, interestingly enough, has some good wins in her. She beat Macy Barber, who I think a lot of people, even Macy Barber, were expecting to be a champ at like an early age. I will root for her on that one alone. Wins over Ji Young Kim, who, just fought a couple weeks ago and had that great battle with Molly McCann that I still feel she won. I'll never. But McCann, great win last weekend.
You're not gonna get over it?
I'm never gonna get over it. But McCann, she tore her her opponent up this past weekend. So, hey man, way to prove it. But in doing the MMA math, Grasso does have a good chance at kind of playing spoiler. She is a newer fighter, is significantly younger. It's 35 versus a 28-year-old, and can learn a lot from this experience. Grasso is also from Mexico, which is again, hoping to see these fighters who come from other countries, keep influencing the UFC with their culture. We mentioned Jakisi and that other fighter, we can't even say his last name, Vyacheslav Borshev, bringing in that culture identity into the ring and into the cage. And I want to keep seeing that because I want all these fighters from different parts of the world, and I want to see more fights in different parts of the world, and just keep growing the sport, and that way keeps growing our fan base too. Northern
Absolutely.
Ireland is always trending with us, so shout out. Maybe one day we'll go out there and see Joanne Wood fight in front of her heritage or people. This is the fight where
I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I don't
just
know
made that up.
From Scotland would think about you could say that Northern Ireland.
Northern
and
Ireland,
Scotland
no,
are the
whatever.
same.
It's like Hispanics and Latinos, we're all the same. It's okay, we're cousins. Distinct separation. I'm gonna get beat up for that. But for many things at this point, I'm sure. Girl fights, I like having it be a co-main event, keep attracting eyes to the sport. One thing I've gotten myself out of is also, like, with these fights that go to decisions, like, I'm just old school. Like, I want a definitive outcome. And watching a lot of these fights lately and seeing the ones that went to decision, and seeing that they were battles, and just who came out on better, who was better prepared, that to me is starting to intrigue me more and more, to see the cardio, the strategy, do they have the ability to be a complete mixed martial artist? And I think it'll show. With a lot of the girl fights, you don't tend to see finishes, except for McCann last weekend. A lot of them go to decision, and they're still great fights. So I want to see this. I want to see another great girl fight. Can it live up to the hype of the one last weekend, which I think we'll see forever? That's going to be like in the top UFC 100 knockouts of all time. I want to see that energy and momentum keep going for the girls. Like, all eyes are going to be on these girls. Like, they're the only girls on, they're on the main card. So.
Yeah, before last week, when I think of like the greatest women's fights ever, I'd probably go back to Wei Li and Joanna.
Mm-hmm.
That fight last week, I can't say it was not as competitive, but it was definitely up there in the top women's fights ever, just because of the energy that McCann brought into the fight,
mm-hmm.
and how close she was to finishing her for so long, and she could not finish her off. And then her opponent actually coming back, throwing strikes back. That's always the best. Makes it more exciting, but it's not just one-sided. And then it was the finish. That is going to be a highlight finish that's going to be shown on so many UFC promos, I'm sure, for so long. That spinning elbow finish from McCann. Well, back to Joanne Wood and Alexa Grasso. To have to follow up that fight from last week has got to suck for them. But I still am looking forward to seeing the fight, although I'm not expecting to see that kind of a finish. Both of these fighters, when they do get the finish, it tends to be from submission, not from TKO or from KO. I'm rooting for Joanne. I think if you look at her stats, even though these are kind of another mirror match, I do feel like they favor Joanne a little bit more, even though she doesn't have the momentum. If you look at her output, she does more when they're up on the feet, and she also does more in terms of the grappling. If you look at her takedown average, her takedown accuracy, her takedown defense she's just got a little bit of edge on all of those stats. For that reason, I'm going to be picking, and I'm just picking every underdog apparently on this fight card. I like all the underdogs on this fight card. Any other thoughts on that one?
No,
Okay.
like I said, all eyes are going to be on them, because I hope they can live up to the hype of it and the result of last weekend, and it'd be great. If not, I still expect them to put on a show. For
the main event, Curtis Blaydes versus Chris Dawkis. Blaydes coming in as a -400 favorite, which last week we saw like 3 fights on the main card were -400 favorite. So odds makers are predicting this is going to be very lopsided. Blaydes, known for his superior wrestling, probably the best wrestling in the heavyweight division, probably the best wrestler we've seen, maybe since DC. I don't know who would be on Curtis's level in terms of the takedown. Getting the takedown and getting into top position. I think Blaydes might have a record for most takedowns in a heavyweight fight. I remember like a few years ago, he ended up getting like 14 takedowns or something crazy in a single fight. I can't remember if it was against Derek Lewis or Nagano. This guy is just a takedown monster. That's going to be a tough night for Dawkis for sure when it comes to taking on that caliber of a wrestler in Curtis Blaydes. What are your thoughts on it?
Dawkis, I think the odds makers are very accurate on this one. Blaydes, I love Derek Lewis, but going into that fight, I was like, and he showed it early on. You're like, Derek Lewis is in for a long night, until he caught him with that, uppercut that was very intentional, very well placed, very everything. When even Daniel Cormier is commenting on Blaydes' wrestling abilities, he is something that is above average. He's gonna be the guy to beat, I think, going forward. With Dawkis, watching some of his fights, he's got an interesting style because I don't know if I'd call him anything. Like his one finish against Alexsky Olynyk, he was definitely winning the stand-up, but there wasn't anything like defining about it. It wasn't like power, it wasn't quickness, it wasn't precision. Like he ends up like when he finished Alexsky, he's got him pinned against the cage, and they were like, Alexsky's clearly rocked, and Dawkis did like pitter-patter punches, and I was like, I'm not a pro fighter, but like, just like, damn, dude, like, sit on your punches, something, because he's like, just like, and it was like flailing. Anyone who watches fights, watch that fight, and it's just like he ends up landing one or two finally, and the ref stops it because Alexsky was like still standing up because he's, you gotta kill him to stop him. But I was just like, man, like that's not, like, if I saw that and I was Curtis Blaydes, I was like, I'm gonna run right through him. There's no way that he's as close to being as powerful, as accurate as Derek Lewis, who I thought Blaydes was beating up until that point in that fight. Yeah, Dawkis is a really big guy. What is he, like 6'5"? So I think he uses his size to his advantage, and I see Blaydes running through him, man. Like, Dawkis has some wins, but I don't think he's got the opposition that Blaydes has had. Blaydes has finished some champions, and
yeah. And Dawkis, I guess an interesting stat, although I don't know how impressive this is because I don't know how many takedowns have actually been shot at this guy, but he does have a 100% takedown defense. So he's not been taken down yet in the UFC, and he's going against the guy who may have the record for most takedowns in a heavyweight match against Curtis Blaydes. And the reason I say it may not be that impressive is because if you look at his fights in the UFC, Dawkis, he's got 3 wins by KO in the first round, a win by KO in the second round, and a loss by KO in the first round in his last fight against Derek Lewis. So he's not spent a lot of time in the ring to give guys, the opportunity to, shoot shots. But he has gone against some, grapplers like Alexsky Olynyk. So my thought is, if Dawkis can't land the uppercut when Curtis Blaydes is coming in, like Derek Lewis did against Blaydes, I feel like that's Dawkis' only chance. And I feel like he's got to be looking for it because he knows what Blaydes' game plan is going into this. It's not going to be a surprise. It's like fighting Khabib. You know exactly what the guy's going to do, so he's going to be preparing for it. And the question is, in my mind, can Dawkis throw an uppercut when Curtis Blaydes is taking a shot on him? If the answer is yes, he'll win. If the answer is no, then he's going to lose. And, I feel like that's how it's going to play out. And my guess is, that Blaydes is going to win. The odds makers are right on this one. This is not one where I'll pick the under. I'll go with all the other underdogs on this card, but not this one. Not picking Dawkis. I'm picking Blaydes on this one. And if you're playing DraftKings, this, Blaydes is such a great fighter to pick because you rack up all those points from takedowns, which I love to see. 14 takedowns, at 5 points apiece in a DraftKings lineup. That's a lot of points. This fight is going to be in Columbus, Ohio. You can expect that the crowd is going to be going absolutely nuts because they probably haven't seen, any live fighting for years now. If it can be anything like UK, it's probably going to be off the hook. It's going to be crazy. It's probably going to be a fun fight night with energy from the crowd going on. Any last thoughts, Fern?
No, thanks for following. Thanks for joining us on this ride. We look forward to breaking down more and more fights and doing more live streams because they're super easy for us to do unless we have connectivity issues. I'll shake my fist at my internet provider. But other than that, thanks for joining us. Bam Fight Club, add us on all social media. We're getting there. We're gonna reach 1 million people here shortly. And
hit subscribe.
Right?
Yeah, we got to get our YouTube up. Our other Instagram, Facebook are doing great. We got to get our YouTube subscribes and views and likes up. So smash that like button, smash the subscribe button.
Yeah, thanks again for
and leave a comment. Yeah, leave a comment if you disagree. We want to hear what you have to say in the comment section. Let's hear it.